friends, it's been a little while since I've been here to talk to you about a tutorial, and today I want to talk to you about what I learned as the Hong Kong stitch, which is a way to bind edges doing sort of like a really nice hem, like this one right here. Um, and I have lots more tutorials that I would love to do. I really want to get back into long form content. I post a lot on my other socials, and if I'm being honest, I'm not very used to doing really short stuff, kind of like what you see on TikTok. I've always enjoyed more explaining things a little bit more thoroughly and stuff. So I hope you look forward to it. And if there's anything that you want to see, please let me know. And thank you so much, everyone who has been so supportive with like all of the other stuff that I do, including all my gaming content. So thank you so much. But let's go ahead and get started with this. And I'm going to show you more about what this method is, how you can do it, and what you will need for it. All right, let's get started. Okay, so what is the Hong Kong stitch? This is the way I learned it and the way I learned the name of it, but it is basically a way to cover your edges. And this is a great way to do an accent color, especially if you have any sort of metallic edges or anything like that. So basically you cover your edge with a strip of fabric and you fold it over and then sew it. And this one I did with a stretch metallic. This is also a stretch fabric, so it's pretty easy to do it when both fabrics are stretchy. Really quick, if you do use a stretch fabric, you can just cut a strip of it. I have one right here just to show you. This is what I did. It's just a strip of stretch fabric. Basically, you put it on the edge, like right sides facing each other. You sew however thick you want that to be, so make sure that however wide the strip is, it can actually like completely fold over and cover the whole edge. So you sew it and then it'll look like something like that. So then you basically fold it over completely and then sew it. So what a lot of people know as the stitch in the ditch would be right and that edge, the ditch, basically. A lot of people know this technique as stitch in the ditch. I know it as a Hong Kong stitch using a stitch in the ditch. So I hope that makes sense. I'm going to show you some other examples, and then I'm going to go ahead and actually show you how to do it. Okay, so here I have another example of when I use this. You can see right here, so great way to bind. But this time I didn't do the stitch in the ditch. You can actually see where I did a little mess up. Stitch in the ditch would be right there, whereas over here I sewed right like on. I didn't sew it down here where the ditch is. I sewed it right on top. So I also did it at the bottom here, which is another way to, it just looks so clean. It turns out so nice, and you can use matching fabrics. I did it to match the inside of my vest, just to match the lining. Very, very nice. So there are different ways that you can go about making what would be the binding piece. Let me go ahead and show you how to do either stretch or non-stretch. Okay, so here are some things that you can use. If you are going to be covering your edge with a metallic, I highly recommend using a stretch fabric. If you're going to do this, you can simply just cut out a strip. Just make sure that the width, as I explained before, is enough for you to sew it however wide you want that part to be. Because you might want just like a little tiny detail, or you might want something a little bit wider, right? So you can just use a normal, you can just cut straight down if you're using a stretch fabric. You can also use bias tape, and this is the pre-made stuff that, you know, comes in packaging. It looks something like this. I'm sure you have seen it, but I know that a lot of this stuff is very limited. And the wonderful thing about this method, though, is if you do want to use bias tape, that way you're not just, for example, let's say you're going to do this, you're not just sandwiching it and sewing it. It'll actually give you a much cleaner look. So, but if you want to use your own fabrics, then let me show you actually with this grid to explain what the bias is. You might already know what it is, but for everyone who doesn't, I'll show you. So fabric, if you look at fabrics, they have what's called a grain. So you'll see threads that run, you know, this way and this way. So vertically and horizontally. So what the bias would be, so imagine that all of the yellows are the threads, right? So what the bias would be is the diagonal of it. So let's say that you have a fabric, let's just use this as an example, right? And if you look, actually you might see it better here. This is a stretch fabric, but you get the idea. So let's say that here's your fabric and the grain in this one is going the same direction as the yellow lines on the grid, right? So vertically and horizontally. So the bias would be diagonally. So if I were to make a bias, I would cut it like this and just make strips that would be like this. So that's the fast, easy. See, even my dog agrees. But yeah, so that's the basic of what would be the bias and how you can make your own. If you want me to go more into this and how you can make your own bias, let me know. But that's the TLDR of it. All right, so I sort of explained it before, but let me show you what to do whenever you want to do this. Let's say that this is the front side of this fabric, right? And we want to cover this edge. I'm going to be using the stretch for this, the stretch gold. This is not stretch, this is stretch. If you are using any stretch binding for this, I highly, 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 highly recommend that you use a walking foot. Doesn't matter if this is also stretch, because it's going to give you the nicest finish, and that way you don't have to use a zigzag to sew two stretch fabrics. So get a walking foot and it's going to make everything so much easier. And that way you can just use a straight stitch for this. So let me explain it and then I'll actually show it to you. It's a lot of steps to this, so thank you for being so patient as I explain this. So let's say this is the front side of the fabric, so we want to make a relatively wide, you know, gold edge on this. So then I would put the right sides facing together just on the edge, and at this point I would sew however wide I want that gold edge to be, right? Or however the edge you want it to be. So once I sewed that, right, then I can flip it. Let's say it looks something like that, right? And go ahead and cover the whole edge. And then I can either sew it on the ditch, right? The stitch in the ditch, or you can sew above this. I usually prefer actually to sew it even just like a hair away from it, because as you have seen that I showed earlier, sometimes I'm trying to sew fast and I'm just like sewing and it's like whoop. So that's the best, like the most forgiving, I will say, method is just to sew it just a tad below that. But if you do that, make sure that whatever fabric you have here left over is long enough that it'll actually catch that. If it's not, then I recommend that you sew right on top of it. So when you have it on this side, so let's say it looks, let's say the flap looks something like this. If you don't care, you could just sew it, whatever. Or you can do folding it over, right? And then doing the sewing. You can also do, if you, this is something that you can use on foam. I've actually used this for some of my projects that are foam covered in fabric, but I really want to give it a nice edge. So what I'll do is when I'm going to fold it over, I'll just glue it to the foam. So just different things that you can do. So this is for the stretch. If you are doing non-stretch, it's basically the same thing. You can do this also for bias. If you're going to be doing bias tape, I recommend just opening it up and ironing it, because that way you are not limited to the folds that are already on this. That way you can, you know, make it as whatever width you need, and you don't have to worry about it not looking good or whatever, because you'll have those like creases. So I recommend, it's the same thing, same method, same thing, just opening it, sewing it, folding it over, and then sewing it down. I just recommend ironing it first, unless you want to still follow the lines, which is fine. Basically you would just sew down whatever. Let me get closer. This first line, it's a nice guide, and then that would just, you would just flip this. Nice thing is that this is already folded over, but again, you'd have to make sure that it is long enough for it to catch whatever you sew on this side, unless you sew like right on top of it. So up to you, but that is the basic of it. Let me go ahead and show you as I'm sewing it. Two right sides together, and I used a walking foot for this. That way it'll like sew super easy. This is what that looks like. That's what a walking foot looks like. Okay, so when you sewed this, then you can just flip this and around, and then you either glue this side, you could just use hot glue, or sew it down, and you can do that like right on the edge, or if you want another detail, sewing it right on top. But easy peasy, and that way you get a super nice gold edge. There you go. All right, and that was it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that was helpful. I hope that gave you some ideas for future cosplays or things that maybe you can do in your own sewing. And this is an awesome technique. I've been using it for years. I've used it in multiple costumes, and this is something that I find looks so clean. It's so easy, and you can also use it in your armor. So yeah, I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will see you soon for another tutorial. So let me know what you think, and yeah, thank you all so much. Sending you big hugs. All right, bye.